The Warriors is one of the greatest films of all time. The story kicks off when Cyrus, the leader of the largest gang in New York City, calls together a meeting. This meeting is intended to be a peaceful gathering of New York's strongest gangs, as Cyrus intends to initiate a truce between them all, as they outnumber the police 3-1. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out from the crowd and Cyrus falls from his platform. The perpetrator of the shooting, Luther, is spotted by a member of the Warriors and is quick to blame them. With this in mind, they now have to trek back to Coney Island from Manhattan, while every gang in the city wants their head. It's a real underdog story of survival and of human perseverance against incredible odds. Fast forward a few decades and we've landed at the exact topic of today's video: Rockstar Games' The Warriors. And who better to adapt the film than them? Rockstar was untouchable in this era, with hits such as Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City, as well as Manhunt and Midnight Club. If anybody was to do this adaptation justice, it was them. But the question remains, did they? I plan to not only find that out in today's video, but to also examine the game as a standalone experience as well. And, well, without further delay, let's dive into Rockstar Games' The Warriors.
The Warriors, coming October 2005.
Can you dig it?
The Warriors was released on October 17th, 2005 for PlayStation 2 and Xbox. It was later released for PlayStation Portable on February 12th, 2007. All footage from today's video, unless otherwise noted, will be captured from a real PlayStation 2. The game drops you right into the action, starting off as Rembrandt, a young recruit in the middle of his initiation. This initiation serves as your tutorial to the core mechanics of the game. The Warriors is a brawler, and you'll be using your hands, fists, head, as well as various weapons and the environment to achieve your goals. I'll discuss the mechanics more in detail in just a bit. After the short tutorial, Rembrandt is initiated into the gang and we're introduced to our first antagonist, the Destroyers. The Destroyers are the primary antagonists for most of the game, serving as the stronger of the two gangs fighting for control of Coney Island. Throughout the Warriors, you'll be scrapping with the Destroyers as you slowly chip away at their stranglehold. They weren't depicted in the film, but their inclusion serves as a way to not only expand the Warriors universe and give us a glimpse into the Warriors history, but to show the events leading up to the tragic meeting depicted in the film. This is shown through a series of missions where you're destroying their businesses and property, mugging the locals, or stealing radios from cars. And not all of these are part of the main story either. See, The Warriors is primarily a linear game with a linear story. If you'd like to just plow through the main game, you'll still be able to follow and enjoy what's happening. However, the optional flashback missions will explain more in detail of how the Warriors were formed and their leader Cleon's reason as to why the two gangs cannot coexist. Once you've successfully taken over Coney Island, the events of the film unfold and it pretty much follows it to a T. This is something I absolutely love, not just about the Warriors, but about any video game adaptation. Not only do they adapt the source material, but they expand upon it as well. We learn how the Warriors were formed, how each member joined, and how we got to where we are when we finally do reach the film. You'll play as every warrior depicted, each of their actors' likenesses used. In addition to the Warriors, other character likenesses appear, such as Cyrus, Luther, Sully, and more. What blows me away even more though is that most characters have their own movesets and unique animations with minor overlap here and there. What I mean by that is that the Warriors functions like most three-dimensional brawlers, where cross is your heavy attack and square is your light attack. Most combos involve 2 to 3 inputs right after one another, but you'd be best off mixing it up between those heavy and light attacks. Experiment with different combos with different characters and see what's out there. Grappling is also a thing in the Warriors. I loved grabbing an opponent and throwing them off of a high platform. There's no ragdolling or anything like that, it's all animation based, so you oftentimes see things that just don't really look right. But to me, that's just part of the game's charm and something you'll get used to pretty quickly. Additionally, while grappling, if you're near a wall, you can perform an environmental attack. These are extremely brutal. They can range from smashing someone's skull into a concrete wall or maybe tossing them through a wooden door, for example. Each character also has a special attack. It's not a game with heroes or special abilities or anything like that, but each character has an attack that's triggered by typically pressing cross and square. This could be a sweeping kick of some kind or maybe a heavy spinning back fist. These moves were usually reserved for crowd control, at least in my experience, but their effects are enhanced even further when you're in rage mode. As you continue to land punches, kicks, and grapples, a meter is filling on the top left corner of the screen. This rage mode functions like most other rage modes, however it enhances the special attack I mentioned earlier as well. Most of the time the animation is entirely different, but it's destructive and something I use often to handle situations where I was down a man or two. You're also able to time a counterattack with a well-timed button press, usually just as your opponent is about to grapple you, but you can also counterattack after blocking an incoming strike, almost like a parry in other games. Adding another layer to the already in-depth combat, sometimes you'll see your gangmates holding an enemy in a headlock. If you walk up to them and press an attack button, you'll perform a brutal attack on the defenseless opponent. And trust me, this will happen a lot, as you're almost never alone when playing the Warriors. Seeing 5 or 6 of your gangmates brawling with a bunch of opponents is really a sight to behold. And the best part to me is that the frame rate holds up. Sure, the game might not look the greatest, but I really do love this era of visuals. It sort of adds to the grittiness and the overall aesthetic, rather than taking away from it. The world from the film has been faithfully recreated, from the neon pink Ferris wheel on the title screen to the opening train sequence and more. I just want to quickly show these side by side, the film on the left and the game on the right. It's incredible to me how this has been recreated frame by frame. They could have easily just slapped the film scenes here and called it a day, but they went that extra mile. And it's not just in the cutscenes either. Iconic scenes from the film are recreated in a way that expands the possibility for gameplay. For example, there's a scene where the Warriors are trying to pass through the Turnbull AC's turf. The Turnbulls are riding around in a bus trying to spot the Warriors. The Warriors think they see an opening for the train and they make a break for it, only to be chased by their bus and narrowly escape them. Now in the game, they've turned this into a stealth sequence that goes on for a bit longer. Then it ends in that chase from the film. Speaking on those stealth sequences a bit, there's a few in the game, but they're not forced like in other games. They function pretty much how stealth in Manhunt works, if you're familiar with that game. If not, I'll explain it a bit. So there are specific locations in the level that are darker than others. This is shown on your HUD. Your character's name will turn blue on the top left, and the map will also turn blue on the bottom right. Your character's stance will also change. While in stealth, you're also able to pull off stealth kills by sneaking up on an enemy and snapping their neck. If they're not in an ideal position for this, you're able to pick up bottles, bricks, or whatever else you can find and toss it to gain a more advantageous position. It's a pretty basic system overall, but is expanded upon because remember, this is the Warriors and you're almost never alone. The Warriors feature 6 specific commands that you're able to give your gangmates, each serving a different purpose to each situation. Let's go and hold up are self-explanatory, with scatter being useful when you're being chased by police or other gangs. Your gangmates will run and hide looking for any kind of cover they can find. My favorite commands were wreck 'em all, which causes your gang to fight anybody in sight, and if no one is around, they'll grab weapons and prepare for the next fight. Watch my back is useful if you're getting overwhelmed. Your gang will come to your aid and defend you, though the command I liked the most was mayhem. Mayhem causes your gang to go absolutely batshit crazy, destroying anything in sight. This is extremely useful for those missions I mentioned earlier where you're busting up storefronts and cars. These were some of my favorite missions in the game. Just pure chaos really, without interruption. Each of these missions serve not only as a way to take the destroyers down a notch, but as a way to earn money for your gang. Now, admittedly, there isn't much to buy in the Warriors, but you'll need cash to buy flash and to buy paint. Flash is some sort of inhaled drug that you're able to buy from dealers to restore your health. Health is shown on the circle under your character, or you're able to physically see your condition on the model with cuts, scrapes, and bruises appearing as you take more damage. Paint, on the other hand, is used both for combat and for spraying tags around the world. Admittedly, I didn't use it as much as a weapon since it uses up an entire can of spray just for one use, but you'll be doing a lot of tagging throughout your time with the game. When you approach a wall that can be tagged, it'll trigger a minigame where you're expected to trace a W for basic tags and different shapes for more complex layered tags. Each layer will consume at least one full can, regardless of how quickly you complete the tag. Wasting paint isn't the end of the world though. You can always buy more, or even mug or kill the dealers. Now, the dealers are pretty tough, and I wouldn't attempt this if I were you unless you had a weapon and a good chunk of extra health you're willing to lose already. In my experience, it's easier to steal car radios or mug civilians to earn that money to pay the dealers with. Stealing car radios also triggers a minigame, where you have to rotate the left stick counterclockwise to pull the screws out. Mugging works in a similar way, where you're expected to push the left stick in a direction where the controller vibrates, to fill the bar up on the top before the one on the bottom does. Alternatively, you can be on the receiving end of this, and to escape you have to avoid the vibrations. In between each mission, at least before you leave for the meeting, you'll return to the Warriors hangout where you're able to take on new main missions, new flashback missions, improve your stats downstairs, free roam around Coney Island, or play the game's various party modes. Working out to improve your stamina is something that you must do when you play through the Warriors. Each one you complete will increase your stamina. They don't take much time to complete, with you either having to button mash or pull off a set combo on the screen in under a certain amount of time. Free roaming around Coney Island felt a bit like busy work, so on this playthrough I didn't do much of it, but on your playthrough I do recommend doing as much of them as you can stomach. It'll usually involve you helping people around the town with various tasks. Maybe a rival gang is invading and you need to knock out a certain number of them under the time limit, or maybe they're attacking one of your businesses and you have to defeat them before they destroy the business. These side objectives unlock a variety of things in the game, like the ability to carry more flash on you or brass knuckles, but more importantly to me, it unlocked content for the party modes, which the game calls Rumble Mode. Let me tell you right now, Rumble Mode in the Warriors could be its own separate game. I'll just go down the list and talk about them briefly, starting with 1v1. Just as the name implies, it's a 1 versus 1 battle to the death. It's okay to me, but the Warriors shines when it's a large crowd versus a large crowd, and thankfully War Party and Armying both shine bright in that regard. Both are team deathmatches essentially, with War Party being 5v5 and Armying being a massive 9v9. They're chaotic as hell and I love them both. Next up we have Survival, which is essentially a horde mode with waves of enemies attacking you. My strategy in this mode is to simply run away and try to avoid the conflict as much as possible, since you're alone up against 5 or more opponents at a time. Have Mercy is up next, and it's sort of like a capture the flag, except in this game you're capturing Mercy and trying to throw her into your end zone to win. I just didn't like this one very much. It's a 1v1, so just this time it had an objective. Burner Battle is a bit different though. It's a 1v1 still, yes, except this time instead of killing each other, your goal is to complete your tag before your opponent does. So you'll be running around trying to replenish your paint while also trying to stop your opponent from completing their tag. You're able to interrupt their spray and it makes for some hilarious moments, really it does. Next up though is my absolute favorite party mode, and it's Battle Royale. It's a 9v9, so great. What makes this mode so much fun is the fact that you're tasked with throwing your opponents off of this tall building before they toss all of you off. It's so chaotic, especially since you can accidentally toss an enemy into a friendly and ring them out, or you might even ring multiple opponents out with that. Every time someone gets rung out, the camera pans to them falling to their death. It's ridiculous and a mode that I played so much of as a kid. Up next we have Wheels of Steel, a 1v1 wheelchair race. Now this mode kind of threw me off. Instead of using your analog stick to steer and the face buttons to accelerate and brake, you only use the shoulder buttons L1 and R1. Holding both moves you in a straight line, but holding only one will steer you in that direction. It doesn't sound difficult until you actually do it, and once you fall behind, it's pretty hard to catch back up unless they make a mistake. It's ridiculous, and it seems like something I'd see in a Jackass skit, but it's fun, and it's a nice break from the usual gameplay loop. Finally, we end with one last mode, King of the Hill. This mode is somewhat similar to Battle Royale, except this time around you're able to climb back up to the top and you have 4 members per gang. As long as your gang is able to stay on the highest platform, you'll earn points, and the first gang to 100 points wins. This mode was also pretty fun, at least until my opponent figured out he could just stand on the edge and wait for me to climb up. I was unable to counter him and I got my ass tossed again and again and again. Now, the keen-eyed among you may have noticed this, but if you haven't already, all of the modes available in the Warriors are playable with 2 players. It enhances the experience, the ridiculous moments are enhanced, and it adds so much replayability to an already loaded game. The campaign, the Rumble mode, and the final mode I'm going to talk about, Armies of the Night, are all playable with a second player. Armies of the Night is available on the arcade cabinet in your hideout, and again, this could be its own game. The game takes place over a series of 5 stages, each with their own gangs and bosses to fight. It's clearly a throwback to side-scrolling beat-em-ups of the past like Double Dragon and Final Fight. From the very beginning, it's obvious, from the enemy health displayed on the HUD to shared limited lives between the 2 players. Let me tell you though, this is not an easy game, and if you're not careful, you can very easily eat through all of your lives and end in a game over, which sends you back to the beginning of the game. It took me and a friend about 45 minutes or so to complete this, but it's just another great addition to this absolutely stacked game. Now, this entire time I've sat here and praised the Warriors, but surely it cannot be a perfect game, right? Well, to me, I don't think any perfect game exists, but it's pretty damn close. I did have a few issues when revisiting the game this time around, and I wanted to quickly discuss those though. First off, to me, the biggest issue with older 3D games is how they handle camera movement, and the Warriors is really no different in that regard. The camera during fights seems fine, it'll zoom out and give you a more detailed aerial view of the fight, and it'll zoom in to highlight a knockout blow before returning to its previous position. The camera becomes an issue during more static scenes like boss fights, for example, as well as scripted chase sequences. Starting with the static scenes, I'm going to use this example here where I'm playing as Cleon, trying to bash my way out of this parking lot I'm locked inside of. The initial camera isn't bad, it's zoomed out so I can see most of my surroundings and plan my movements. Once you reach a certain level of progress though, the camera then flips to the other side to where you're looking up at the guys that are attacking you, as opposed to looking down at yourself from their angle. I found it disorienting and far too close to my character. If I was too close to the camera, I couldn't see mine or Swan's meters. There was even one point where I ran into the camera on the far right side of the parking lot, and it actually panned back. I found out that I could go back there and grab items. So it got to a point where I was just done with the mission, and I started to just rush my way through it, not really caring how much damage Swan or I took. Now, this isn't the only example of this in the game either. It does happen more than once, but I found this to be the most annoying example. Moving along to those scripted chase sequences now, if the scene isn't a button mashing session, you'll have complete free control of your character. The primary problem with these scenes is that the game's camera is placed in a cinematic view, as opposed to being pointed in the direction of travel. It makes for a cool visual, I will admit that, seeing the baseball furies right behind you as you're barely ahead of them. The problem with this in my experience is that all the objects that are in your way, all it takes is for you to get caught up on one or two objects and you're getting your ass beat. Like in this scene here, if it wasn't for me progressing, my friend would have died and it would have been a game over for both of us. Now, if this was the standard camera, we would have been able to avoid these objects on the street easily. Another issue with the camera I found specifically related to the two-player mode. Typically, you'll both play on the same screen in a fight, brawling with enemies and doing what you need to do to win. The problems arise when you get too far apart. The screen will just abruptly split in two, and now you're left wondering which direction you're now facing, where the enemies are, and what your next move is exactly. This also happens, except in reverse, when you get close to one another again, combining the two screens into one. It's a neat idea in concept, but I believe the execution was poor, and I would have just preferred one or the other, honestly. But even with these issues, the Warriors' pros greatly outweigh the cons. For me, I can get over a slightly janky camera or bad level or two to enjoy an otherwise wonderful game. The Warriors is not only one of Rockstar's finest games, but it's one of the best licensed games of all time, if not the best. To me, it helps set the standard for all movie-to-game adaptations to follow. And to be honest with you, I have a hard time choosing between this, Scarface, or GoldenEye as the best of all time. Let me know in the comments if you'd like for me to cover those games too at some point. As I wrap this video up, I want to turn it over to you. Have you ever seen or played The Warriors? If so, what did you like about it? Maybe there was something I missed in this video. I would love to read your comments on the subject. I love to hear your stories, anything you want to talk about in the comments I would love to read. My name is NoMooreMercy, and as always, have a good one.